this is a near and dear conversation to me. If you guys didn't know, I grew up in the former Soviet Union right before it fell. So we came as refugees from Azerbaijan to America, and we were ethnically Armenian and never went to church while we were in Azerbaijan. We never understood our own deep, rich connection to Christianity as being ethnically Armenian. And I didn't quite understand why I didn't hear about Christianity and Jesus until I came to America and went to an Armenian church in America, until I started understanding Marxism, communism, and its outward hostility towards faith and people of faith. And so now, like, as a grown man, like, it's all clicking for me. But it's not just clicking for me in terms of like, oh, communism is bad. No. What you start seeing is the tenets of communism so pervasively impacting our society today, and the values that are being exhibited today, and the things that are being seeping in consistently into Christian ideology, some Christian circles today. And so I appreciated this conversation. Let's jump into this. This is from Jordan Peterson's channel. Go ahead.
Why he turned to atheism. These poems that he wrote that were pans to Mephistopheles, is that after he becomes an atheist?
No, he's writing, so the first one was 1837, wrote another in 1841. He wrote a bunch of them.
Right.
He did just a chilling play called Ulanem, O-U-L-A-N-E-M. And people that are watching this, if they now type into their computer Ulanem, even in Google, it'll pop up, play by Karl Marx. Yeah. It even has a Wikipedia entry. And let me warn people, you might not want to do this, but if you click the images button, you will see, there's some satanic stuff up there from, like, not heavy metal, but like black metal groups. So Ulanem is an anagram for Emmanuel, or Manuelo. Right. So Marx takes Emmanuel, which is the name given to Christ, or Manuelo, and he flips it into this anagram called Ulanem. And it's this chilling play. The main character is Lucindo, L-U-C-I-N-D-O. You just can't believe what you're reading with this play. So that was written later in the 1840s. So really the prime of his writing, including the decade when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, is also the same decade when he was writing these poems.
And plays.
Karl Marx, who coined Marxism, which then evolved to communism, socialism, in the same decade that he wrote the Communist Manifesto, is writing these bizarre, dark, twisted plays, playing with Satanism and atheism. But it gets worse. It gets worse.
And plays, and throughout his life, his kids and others would say, he had a favorite line always from Mephistopheles, everything that exists deserves to perish. So that remains a part of him throughout his life. His son, Edgar, has a letter where he addresses his father as "my dear devil."
Got the kids calling the dad "my dear devil." Now, if you don't know, all you got to do, so many of our issues, and I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, right? Because that's not this. But if you go up the chain of the George Soros, if you go up the chain of the World Economic Forum, if you go up the chain of you will own nothing and you will love it, you will, right? We need climate justice and social justice and all these justices. What they're really getting at is a Marxist view. And I'm not using that word flippantly. Like, this is actually the ideology that the bourgeoisie and those people who control the means of capitalism, capital is what creates innovation technology, that creates value. The people that control this, that needs to be controlled by the workers. There needs to be a equality of outcome. We're not trying to create an equality of opportunities. We're trying to create an equality of outcome. That's already problematic for very obvious reasons. So it's problematic in its fruit. But what makes this interesting is that it's also problematic in its root. So if something is problematic in the core of his ideology, the dude writing this stuff that everyone is holding to, and then you couldn't find out this dude's a Satanist, like this is crazy stuff. And you go to any college, university, and guess what they're shoving down kids' throat? Marxism, communism, socialism. Yep. Right?
I don't know. Maybe it's playful. I don't know.
Yeah.
Although I would never, call my dad "my dear devil." His wife called him "my wicked knave." I quote Henrik Heinzen referring to him as a goblin who tried to take me under his spell. Other cases of where he's using that kind of language. When Engels first met him, he describes him as this dark man from Trier. who hops and leaps and springs on his heels. The monster of 10,000 devils, he describes him. And the letter from his father is, which was written in 1837, a year before his father died. So his father writes to him, March 2nd, 1837. Carl, at times my heart delights in thinking of you and your fortune, and yet at times I cannot rid myself of ideas which arouse in me sad forebodings and fear when I am struck, as if by lightning, by the thought. Is your heart in accord with your head, your talents? Has it room for the earthly but gentler sentiments, which in this vale of sorrow, it's a beautiful letter in many ways, are essentially consoling for a man of feeling? And then this question from the father of Karl Marx to his, at this point, 18-year-old son. And since that heart, Carl, is obviously animated and governed by a demon, not granted to all men, is that demon heavenly or Faustian? Will you ever, and that is not the least painful doubt of my heart, will you ever be capable of truly human domestic happiness?
He said, you are possessed, child.
Get Pagani.
Get Pagani on the phone.
God has no less tortured me since I have come to love a certain person like my own child. Will you ever be capable of imparting happiness to those immediately around you? By the way, the answer was no, right?
Well,
but that
obviously
phrase,
the father had intimations of that.
Yeah, and since that heart is obviously animated and governed by a demon, not granted to all men, is that demon heavenly or Faustian?
Right,
That's his dad.
Yeah.
And there's only so many of those things I think that a sympathetic Marxist or Marxist biographer can shrug off. I mean, there's just so many statements like that from him and people about him and people who knew him and loved ones and a wife, a son, a best friend from Ingalls, and then the different writings. Whew.
Okay, so let's attack this.
Now, was he a Satanist, right?
Well,
that is a whole different thing that
listen to what Jordan Peterson says. Was he? So he says, now was he a Satanist? Now listen to the case Jordan Peterson makes on if Karl Marx was a Satanist.
I can't personally answer.
Well, it seems not unreasonable to presuppose that he was a devotee of the Mephistophelian ethos.
Yeah, I think that's
right. So
really.
I don't know what that means, but he's
okay. I was going to say, I need you to explain.
The question is, what constitutes a Satanist? Well, someone who generates a murderous doctrine, that raises questions. I mean, dead serious about that. Like, right. The most murderous doctrine ever promoted in the roughly Judeo-Christian context by a large margin. So I would say it's incumbent on those who would defend him to describe why we wouldn't just assume that. But the part of the reason that I was so interested in talking to you was because
I think sometimes this gets downplayed. How many people actually died at the hands of communism and his ideology? Like the attempts to implement Marxism, communism, socialism has caused the most amount of death across the world.
Why does that happen? Why is that? How did
they're going to get into it, but why I don't think we talk about it enough.
Yeah.
Two reasons. One, I think because the Holocaust was so awful that we see that as like the pinnacle of depravity of humanity. No, like this stuff was actually just as bad in many instances in terms of the amount of people that died.
Yeesh.
Two, I think because there's a lot of infatuation with this concept on the universities today. There's a lot of infatuation with socialism. There's a lot of infatuation with these tenets without understanding their roots and understanding the fruit of where they've been played out. Look at anywhere this stuff has been tried out and look at where it's gone to.
Yeah.
Right? Look at North Korea, look at China, look at the Soviet Union, Venezuela. Look at how these things played out, right?
So why does this idea of everyone winning, right? That's how they'll pitch it. Lead to like everybody dying. Like, how does it turn murderous from something that was supposed to be a little like...
Because you cannot detangle the hostility. Equal outcomes, you can't detangle that from detangling God, because you have to detangle the ultimate forms of justice, because everyone is not equal in the sense of their talents and abilities. So when you're trying to create a utopia, you're trying to play God. So then you are removing a Christian worldview. So you're infusing a counter worldview. So then who gets ultimate authority? The government. Those in charge become God.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, go ahead.
So it's the trying to control so much to have such a good outcome for everybody that by the nature of it, you have to neglect the recognition of God in people's lives.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Wow.
So these people think that like equality of outcome is a good thing, but equality of outcome is actually a bad thing.
I felt that what you documented in your book was extraordinarily telling from the psychological perspective, because I know how these things work. And it is not something that can be overlooked. that was his favorite quote.
Right.
I mean, especially not when you understand Goethe's centrality in the German intellectual tradition. That's like having a favorite quote from Shakespeare, right? And it's not any old quote. It's the central credo of Mephistopheles. So that's extraordinarily telling. Now, okay, now I do have another...
Can I give you a...
Yes.
So Robert Payne, the very serious academic, no right-winger, British man of letters, the guy who really broke this first in his 1968 biography of Marx, all right? His chapter where he talks about this stuff is called The Demons in his Marx biography. Now, he wrote this, and I'm not saying that I endorse this. As an academic, I can't say if this is correct. There were times when Marx seemed to be possessed by demons. That's what Payne wrote.
Jeez.
And now this I would at least...
These are fans. These are fans.
Yeah.
Marx had the devil's view of the world and the devil's malignity. Sometimes he seemed to know that he was accomplishing works of evil. I think that gets closer to it. Now, Pastor Richard Wurmbrand, who wrote the famous book Tortured for Christ, and was tortured for Christ in Romanian prisons by communist captors who were shouting, "I am the devil," while they were torturing him. He did a book called Marx and Satan. He's convinced that Marx was a Satanist and did some things ritualistically that it might have even been satanic. But I can't say that. I can't endorse that.
But you see evidence of that in his play.
I've never seen...
In terms of at least his fantasies.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
In fact, Payne even goes so far as to say, Vladimir Lenin, right? There's a statement from Lenin which said, when I was a teen, I broke from all religion. I took the cross from my neck and I threw it in the rubbish bin. And Payne has a quote where, not Payne, Richard Wurmbrand, where I think he believes that Lenin even stomped on it. He says, well, that's a satanic ritual. I don't know. I don't know that it is or not. But there's another case of Lenin who at least did the work of the devil. I mean, Lenin had, according to Robert Conquest, W.H. Chamberlain, the first historian of the Russian Revolution, 500,000 people were killed from 1917 to 1923 under Lenin, not even including the Russian Civil War. If that's not the devil's work, I don't know what the hell is, right? But I think what Payne said in the latter quote, the devil's view of the world, the devil's malignity, and at the very least, this identification with kind of devilish-like destruction, right? Tearing everything down, rebelling against the world, everything that exists deserves to perish. That at least, and then the ideology that he created that just happened to be responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people in the 20th century, you know, more than World War I and World War II combined.
Again, most people don't know that. Over 100 million people is the fruit of this ideology. This is Lenin, this is Stalin, this is Soviet Russia. Like they killed their own peasants. And so this stuff is super sinister and super dark.
So how does killing their own peasants tie back to Marxism or communism?
Well, a lot of times they would overthrow people who were in opposition. They would kill religious people. They would kill priests. They would take control of churches. A lot of times it was the people who would protest and wanted something different. It was absolute power absolutely corrupts.
Yeah, so it was trying to create a utopia. Everyone's equal. No one goes up. Everyone goes down. So then you have a bunch of people that are suffering, essentially, right? If you look at North Korea, similar sort of things.
Well, you remove the incentives. So you starve people when you remove incentives from people who are entrepreneurial. You kill the entrepreneurial spirit, and guess who's doing all the innovating? Guess who's doing all the production? Guess who's doing... The government does not do a good job of these things.
And so then you get a bunch of people revolting or being a little bit upset about it, and then you get a government that's like, oh, that's anti the mission, so we need to kill these people.
And I think it's very naive not to assume that the events that we described in Marx's life are not connected. Right?
Yeah,
right.
correct.
And that his economic polemics were somehow independent of his poetic imagination. It's like, obviously they weren't, because they wouldn't have had that motivational force. So they were calling on dark forces, obviously. So, because otherwise they wouldn't have compelled people in that manner, especially not toward that sort of immense sadistic murderousness and utter destructiveness.
And of course,
they were calling on dark forces. That's a gem.
Yeah, that's horrifying.
The hatred of God, which all the communists did. So all the communists thereafter seek to ban religion.
Right. Atheists.
That's
They're
right.
not exactly atheists, because they're trying to stomp something out.
That's right. It's not just. It's not
a neutrality.
That's right. It's not a neutrality toward religion. It's not irreligion. It's not separation of church and state. It is militant, aggressive atheism. Trotsky and Lenin create the League of the Militant Godless.
Right.
They ban religion.
Militant, aggressive atheism. And this is why I never went to church when I lived in the former Soviet Union. Even though I'm ethnically Armenian, and Armenia, arguably one of the first Christian nations with the deepest roots to Christianity, we didn't have a written language until we created one to translate the Bible. And we never went to church until came to America.
They have the Moscow church trials. They blow up churches. They jail priests, right? You know, the Solzhenitsyn writes in the Gulag Archipelago, they put nuns in special sections of the Gulag with prostitutes.
Yes, right.
Deem them whores to Christ.
Absolutely.
Lenin said, all worship of a divinity is a necrophilia. There is nothing more abominable than religion.
Yeah.
So they don't just try to stop religion. They want Pol Pot, the Buddhist monks in Cambodia, to renounce their vows, to marry. Yeah. It's not enough for them to be quiet. And so after 4 years... I don't know
how you can separate a militantly anti-religious atheism from especially, say, within a Christian context, from something approximating satanic ideology, because I don't see how conceptually that separation is possible. It's one thing to be atheist in the manner that leaves people to go to hell in a handbasket in their own way, but to be actually an enemy of the religious enterprise, that's a whole different thing.
It is.
Right.
So, and that obviously Marx and the communists were obviously that, clearly, obviously.
And Satan might say, I don't care if you believe in me or not, you're doing my work, man.
Which, to be fair, is just it's more like an outright obvious work of the devil. Whereas atheism in general, the idea that God doesn't exist, is an opposition, a militant opposition against God.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, for sure. You know, because you're still gonna have like the other, you know, atheist YouTubers that are like, here's why God doesn't exist, right. And it's like that is the work of Satan.
But to be fair, those atheist YouTubers aren't out here leading the death of hundreds of millions of people
yet. Just kidding.
No,
no, totally.
No,
No, you're right.
Churches blowing up churches.
That also touches on the issue of what it means to believe, right? And I mean, you could imagine someone comparatively harmless who toys with ritualistic satanic activities in a sort of dramatic manner, and then you could imagine someone who tortures nuns and priests and burns down churches, but forgoes any technical affiliation with Satan. Right. I would say that the latter is the Satanist in a much deeper sense than the former. Not that what the former is doing is excusable.
Yeah, or it's satanic.
Yes, right. But to do what the communists did to the religious enterprise is evidence of something far more militant than a mere atheism.
Communism is the rejection of private property. Okay, the rejection. Now, why is this important? The rejection of private property in the 10 Commandments. What you'll notice is we presuppose private property.
Yes.
So within the Big 10,
don't steal.
Don't steal.
Yeah.
And not just don't steal. Don't covet.
Oh, how can you covet something that...
And how can you covet something? So there is no private property within communism. And some people would say, oh, this is private property rights are a modern invention. No, they're not, because they're presupposed in the law. Right? They're presupposed that it's not a 1700 Western American white supremacy. It's people that will make this argument. Private property rights are Western white supremacy. They're not. The rejection of private property and capitalism. What is capitalism? Capitalism is that the means of creating capital can be owned privately. Meaning capital is innovation, technology, ways to produce something, right? Which is more and more important now because you don't need as much hard labor to build stuff anymore. A lot of the technology and innovation is digital, right? Rejection of capitalism, state control of economic activity. Yuck. Why would you want your state to control your economic activity? Mass media, restrictions on freedom and religion, and suppression of opposition and dissent. These are the biggest issues within the communistic worldview. So when you see people were like, yay, Marxism, everyone from the Black Lives Matter organization to folks like Hassan, this is what's being pushed. Rejection of private property, rejection of capitalism. And by the way, capitalism has issues, right? Capitalism has issues. The issue is it overall a better system that pulls more people out of poverty because there's incentive? And when the church is doing its job, the church should be the building out the safety nets through private charity. The antidote to balance out the vigors of capitalism is the church and private charity and Christians who are flourishing, helping to care for the least of these. That's how we balance out capitalism, right? Not the state trying to do good. So anyway, we're going to see these things, and we already see these things everywhere, right? We already see these things everywhere.